Captain James Mitchell had been a prisoner for 6 days, and he'd accepted his own death approximately 5 days and 23 hours ago. It wasn't dramatic acceptance, no grand internal monologue about sacrifice or duty, just practical recognition of reality. His crew was dead, his ship was destroyed. He was the sole survivor of a reconnaissance mission that had gone catastrophically wrong, and he was being held in the deepest secure cells of a Xyrathi command carrier in the middle of space, claimed absolutely by the Xyrathi Empire. The Xyrathi didn't take prisoners to be kind. They took prisoners to interrogate, to extract information, to make examples of. James had been through enough intelligence training to know what was probably coming, and none of his training included, and then they release you with apologies for the misunderstanding. He'd made his peace with it, had mentally written his letters home even knowing they'd never be sent, had thought about his parents, his sister, the career he'd been building in the Human Coalition Intelligence Service, had acknowledged that dying at 32 wasn't ideal, but was always a risk in military service, especially when that service involved going places other species didn't want you to go. On the 7th day, they came for him. 4 Xyrathi guards in full battle armor, towering over his human height even though he was tall by human standards. They were apex predators made manifest, chitinous exoskeleton that served as natural armor, multiple eyes that could track different threats simultaneously, mandibles that could crush through most materials, 4 arms that gave them horrifying advantage in combat. Evolution had made them perfect soldiers. Culture had made them perfect empire builders. They spoke in their native language, clicking, harmonic sounds that his helmet's translator rendered as, "Prisoner will come. Empress commands presence. Resistance will be punished." James stood from his cell's sleeping platform without argument. No point in resisting 4 armed guards when you're unarmed, exhausted, and have accepted death anyway. They didn't bind him. Apparently one unarmed human wasn't considered enough threat to warrant restraints. They escorted him through corridors that James observed with his intelligence officers trained, despite knowing the information would die with him. The Xyrathi command carrier was impressive in ways that human engineering couldn't match. Organic-looking architecture that suggested their biotechnology was centuries beyond human capabilities. Weapons systems integrated into walls at every junction. Crew moving with military precision that spoke to discipline, enforced through generations of martial culture. The ship felt alive in ways human vessels didn't. Walls that seemed to pulse with bioluminescence. Floors that had texture suggesting grown rather than built. Technology and biology merged so seamlessly that distinguishing between them was impossible. They brought him to a throne room that took his breath despite circumstances, that suggested he shouldn't be admiring alien architecture while on his way to probable execution. The space was massive, ceiling rising into shadows his human eyes couldn't penetrate, walls curving with that same organic flow, bioluminescent patterns creating light that was beautiful and slightly unsettling. Court members lined the walls in formal ranks, hundreds of Xyrathi in various states of decorative armor that denoted rank and function. And at the far end, elevated on a dais, sitting on a throne that looked grown from the floor rather than built, was Empress Zarantha. James had seen intelligence briefings about her, grainy images captured by long-range surveillance, reports from the few humans who'd encountered Xyrathi and survived to report back. None of it had prepared him for the reality. She was magnificent in the way apex predators were magnificent, beauty that was fundamentally dangerous. Tall even by Xyrathi standards, her chitinous exoskeleton bearing patterns that marked her as royalty, her multiple eyes fixed on him with predatory focus that made every instinct scream that he was in the presence of something that could kill him without effort. She wore additional armor that was clearly ceremonial rather than functional, elaborate, decorated with patterns that probably meant things in Xyrathi culture that James's brief training hadn't covered. Her presence filled the vast throne room. Not through size, though she was physically imposing. Through authority that needed no announcement, power that required no demonstration. Everyone in the room oriented toward her like planets orbiting a star. "The human who invaded my territory," Zarantha said, her voice carrying harmonics that James's translator struggled to fully render. Something about Zyrathi vocal structures produced sounds in registers humans couldn't quite replicate. "The one who survived when his crew did not. Come closer, prisoner." James walked forward, flanked by his guards, acutely aware that every eye in the room was tracking his movement. He stopped at what seemed like appropriate distance, close enough to hear clearly, far enough to not suggest he was threat. His helmet remained sealed because the atmosphere here wasn't compatible with human respiration, and he had no interest in suffocating before his execution. "You do not kneel," Zarantha observed. Her tone made it unclear whether this was question, accusation, or simple statement of fact. "I'm a soldier, Your Majesty," James said, keeping his voice level and respectful but firm. "I kneel to my chain of command, not to enemy commanders. No disrespect intended, just military protocol I've followed for 14 years. Even when the enemy commander could have you executed with simple gesture." She tilted her head in gesture that James's training identified as curiosity mixed with assessment. "Especially then. If I'm going to die, I'd prefer to die on my feet with my dignity intact rather than on my knees begging for mercy I know won't be granted." Murmurs rippled through the assembled court, clicking, harmonic sounds that James's translator couldn't quite parse. Several Zyrathi looked shocked by his response, their multiple eyes widening in expressions that transcended species in their obvious surprise. Zarantha's eyes narrowed slightly, studying him with intensity that made him feel like specimen under examination. "You wear helmet. You hide your face from your empress. This is sign of disrespect in Zyrathi culture. Concealing oneself before royalty suggests you have something to hide, or that you do not trust the empress to judge you fairly." "This is sign of survival, Your Majesty," James corrected as respectfully as he could while disagreeing with absolute monarch. "Your atmosphere isn't compatible with human respiratory requirements. This helmet allows me to breathe. It's not disrespect, it's biology. If Zyrathi could survive in vacuum without protection, I wouldn't judge you for wearing protective gear in hard vacuum." "Remove it," Zarantha commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority that clearly expected instant obedience. "I would see the face of the human who speaks to me with such boldness. I would judge for myself what manner of being would refuse to kneel before the Empress of the Zyrathi Empire." "That would kill me," James said calmly. "Slowly and unpleasantly as I suffocate in atmosphere my lungs can't process. If you want me dead, Your Majesty, there are significantly faster and less cruel methods available to you." I said remove your helmet. Her tone hardened, multiple eyes fixing on him with expression that suggested she was not accustomed to having her commands questioned. And I said no. James met her gaze as steadily as he could through his helmet's visor, his heart pounding but his voice controlled. "You're the Empress. You command millions. You have absolute authority over your territory and everyone in it. You can absolutely order your guards to remove my helmet by force, and there's nothing I can do to stop you. But I won't do it voluntarily. I won't participate in my own execution that way. You'll have to take what you want by force, and we'll both know you had to force it because I wouldn't give it freely. That might be small rebellion, but it's the only one available to me." The throne room went absolutely, completely silent. Every Zyrathi present seemed frozen in shock at the human who had just refused a direct command from their empress. Refused politely, respectfully even, but definitely refused. Zarantha stared at him, her multiple eyes unblinking, and James genuinely couldn't read her expression because Zyrathi facial structure didn't work like human faces, and his brief intelligence training on their species hadn't covered Empress considering whether to execute you slowly or quickly for defying her authority. Then she did something James absolutely didn't expect. She gestured, and one of her attendants hurried forward carrying a piece of technology James didn't recognize. Zarantha took it, studied it briefly, made some adjustment James couldn't see from his distance, then handed it back to the attendant with instructions in rapid Zarathi. The attendant approached James cautiously, offering the device. Atmosphere generator, James's translator helpfully provided, creates localized field of specified atmospheric composition, will allow human to breathe Zarathi air safely within generated field. James took the device, studying it with his suit's sensors to verify it was actually what they claimed, and not some kind of torture device or trap. His sensors confirmed it was generating field of approximately Earth-normal atmospheric composition. Use the generator, Zarantha commanded. It will allow you to breathe our air safely. Then remove your helmet. I will see your face, human, but I will not kill you simply to satisfy my curiosity. That would be wasteful, and I did not build an empire by wasting resources or potential assets. James activated the generator. The shimmer of compatible atmosphere surrounded him like barely visible bubble. He ran his suit's sensors again to confirm it was safe, watched the readings stabilize, then made his decision. Slowly, giving anyone who wanted to stop him plenty of time to do so, James reached up and unsealed his helmet. Removed it, stood there breathing generated Earth-normal air while facing Empress Zarantha with his actual face visible for the first time since his capture, and watched her go completely, utterly, absolutely still. The silence in the throne room stretched, and continued stretching while James stood there holding his helmet, breathing generated atmosphere, meeting Empress Zarantha's multiple eyes with his own too, wondering if he'd somehow made fatal error, and was about to be executed in new and interesting way his intelligence training hadn't covered. Every Zarathi in the room was staring at their empress now rather than at him, clearly as confused as James about why she'd gone completely motionless. Was this normal? Was she about to order something horrible? Had removing his helmet somehow offended her in a way his translator couldn't explain? You are. Zarantha finally spoke, then stopped. Her mandibles moved in pattern James didn't recognize, started again. You are younger than I expected. I was told you were military captain, which suggested more years of service. But you are. Another pause. Your face, your features, they are unexpected. James had absolutely no idea how to respond to that observation from the Empress, who just demanded to see his face. I'm 32 standard years old, Your Majesty, which is young by human military officer standards, but not remarkably so. I made captain relatively early in my career due to specialization in intelligence work. As for my face, it's the one I was born with. I apologize if it's offensive in some way I don't understand, but I genuinely can't change it to meet your expectations. Offensive. Zarantha's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, expression James's database tagged as confusion or surprise. No, not offensive. Beautiful. The throne room's silence somehow deepened, becoming almost physical presence. Every Zarathi present seemed to be holding their breath, or whatever Zarathi did instead of breathing. James wasn't entirely clear on their respiratory system. Beautiful. James repeated, certain his translator had malfunctioned. I'm sorry, I think my translator just rendered that incorrectly. Your translator is functioning correctly. I said beautiful. Zarantha leaned forward slightly on her throne, her multiple eyes still fixed on his face with intensity that was making him deeply uncomfortable. By what standards? James asked, genuinely confused. James genuinely had no idea how to respond to the empress of the species that had killed his crew, informing him that he was beautiful by alien aesthetic standards. Thank you. He tried, his voice coming out uncertain. That's unexpected feedback from someone who was considering executing me minutes ago. I am still considering executing you, Zarantha said, but her tone suggested she was significantly less committed to that course of action than she had been before seeing his face. "You invaded my territory. Military protocol and political necessity demand that such invasions be punished, or others will believe they can enter Zyrathi space without consequence. But," she made gesture with one of her forearms, and servants rushed to place substantial chair before her throne, not throne itself, but furniture that was clearly high honor in this context. "Sit. Tell me why you invaded. Tell me your story. Give me reason not to execute you immediately for your transgression." James sat because standing when she'd explicitly invited him to sit would be insult, and he was trying very hard not to accumulate more reasons for her to kill him. The chair was sized for Zyrathi proportions, too large for his human frame, but it was functional enough. "My ship was on reconnaissance mission, Your Majesty," James began, organizing his thoughts. "We were mapping neutral space near your borders, staying carefully outside any claimed territory based on the most recent treaty boundaries we had access to. Your patrol intercepted us, claimed we had crossed into Zyrathi space, and fired without warning or opportunity to retreat. My crew, 17 good people, died in that attack. My ship was destroyed. I survived in escape pod that your forces recovered. That's the entire story. If we crossed into claimed territory, it was not intentional intrusion. You claim you were not in my territory when my patrol found you." Zarantha's tone was neutral, but her multiple eyes were studying him with intensity that suggested she was evaluating everything about how he delivered information. "I claim we believed we were in neutral space based on the most recent boundary markers we had access to. If we crossed into claimed territory, it wasn't intentional violation. We were following established protocols, respecting recognized boundaries as we understood them. Those boundaries are outdated," Zarantha said bluntly. "The Zyrathi Empire has expanded significantly in recent cycles. Territory that was neutral space 5 years ago is now firmly under my control. Your maps are incorrect if they show otherwise." Then perhaps the Empire should have notified neighboring species of the expansion, instead of shooting first when outdated maps led to accidental incursions, James said, then immediately regretted his tone, because criticizing the Empress's territorial notification policies was probably not excellent survival strategy. But Zarantha didn't immediately order his execution. Instead, she made sound that his translator couldn't quite render, something between acknowledgement and amusement. "You speak boldly for prisoner facing imminent death, Captain Mitchell. Why, do you not fear me? Do you not understand that I could order your execution right now, and no one in this room would question it?" "I'm terrified of you, Your Majesty," James admitted with complete honesty. "You're the absolute ruler of an empire that could crush humanity without significant effort if you chose to. You have well-earned reputation across multiple species for executing people who displease you or challenge your authority. You could kill me with gesture right now, and no one would question your right to do so. Yes, I'm terrified." He met her multiple eyes steadily. "But I'm also already dead in every way that matters. My crew is gone. My ship is destroyed. I'm a prisoner deep in enemy territory with absolutely no chance of rescue or escape. Fear doesn't change those fundamental facts. So I have choice. I can spend whatever time remains to me cowering and submitting and hoping desperately that complete submission will somehow save me. Or I can maintain my dignity and die as myself rather than as broken thing begging for mercy. I've chosen dignity. If that hastens my death, at least I'll die on my own terms rather than yours." Zarantha stared at him in silence that felt like it lasted hours. Then she made gesture with her primary right arm that James's intelligence database identified as Zyrathi expression of respect for worthy opponent. "You are interesting, Captain James Mitchell of the Human Coalition Intelligence Service. Extremely interesting in ways I did not anticipate when I ordered your presence before my throne." She leaned back slightly. You will remain here aboard my flagship, as my guest, not my prisoner, until I decide what to do with you." "Guest or prisoner?" James asked carefully, because those words suggest different status, but the practical reality seems similar if I can't actually leave. "Is there meaningful difference when you cannot leave regardless of terminology?" She had an excellent point. "I suppose not, Your Majesty." "You will call me Zarantha," she commanded, her tone making it clear this was not suggestion. "Not Your Majesty, not Empress, not any title. Zarantha, my name, do you understand?" "That seems inappropriately informal for prisoner addressing captor," James observed. "But if that's your command, then yes, I understand. Zarantha." "It is my command." She made gesture, and the guards who'd brought him snapped to attention. "Escort Captain Mitchell to appropriate guest quarters. Ensure he has everything required for human comfort, proper atmosphere, compatible food, facilities suited to his physiology. He is to be treated as honored guest, not prisoner. Any guard who fails to show him appropriate respect will be executed for failing to follow my explicit commands. Is this absolutely clear?" The guards affirmed in rapid clicking Xyrathi that James's translator rendered as enthusiastic military acknowledgement of orders. They escorted him from the throne room, and James noticed their attitude was noticeably different from before, still alert and professional, but treating him more like important visitor they were guarding rather than threat they were containing. His guest quarters turned out to be suite that was substantially larger than his entire quarters aboard his reconnaissance ship had been. Furnished with Xyrathi furniture that wasn't quite right for human proportions, but was functional enough. Atmosphere generator more sophisticated than the portable one he'd been given, providing perfectly Earth-normal air throughout the space. Food synthesizer that had clearly been programmed with human nutritional requirements. Entertainment systems whose exact purpose he could only guess at. Facilities that suggested someone had actually researched human biological needs. What just happened? James asked his guards, who were taking positions by his door. Why am I suddenly honored guest instead of prisoner awaiting execution? The guards exchanged looks that James couldn't quite interpret. Finally, one of them spoke. The Empress has claimed you. She finds you beautiful by our standards. She wishes to keep you. You should be honored. Empress Zarantha rarely takes such personal interest in anyone, especially not prisoners from species we've had military conflicts with. Claimed me? What does that mean? Like property? James felt panic rising. Like potential consort, the guard corrected. The Empress has not taken consort in 50 standard years. If she is considering you for that role, you have risen to highest possible status in Xyrathi society, beneath only the Empress herself. Many Xyrathi would kill for such honor. James sat heavily on furniture that was slightly too tall for comfortable human use. I'm being courted, he said slowly, trying to process this development, by the Empress who killed my crew. Your crew invaded Xyrathi territory. Their deaths were legitimate military action defending imperial borders. Your survival and current status are completely separate matters. The guard's tone suggested this distinction was obvious and non-controversial. James put his head in his hands and wondered what the hell he was supposed to do now. James spent the next 3 days in surreal existence as honored guest aboard the Xyrathi flagship. He had freedom to move through certain sections of the ship, always escorted by guards, but not restricted to his quarters. He was brought to formal meals with Zarantha and her high court, elaborate affairs where dozens of high-ranking Xyrathi watched him with expressions he couldn't quite read while the Empress asked him questions about humanity, about Earth, about his life before becoming her unexpected guest. Tell me about your world, Zarantha commanded during one of these dinners, her multiple eyes fixed on him with that same intense focus that hadn't diminished since he'd removed his helmet. I have conquered 6 species and absorbed them into my empire over my reign. Each time, I learned their worlds, their cultures, their strengths and weaknesses. I would know what makes humanity worth preserving as independent species rather than conquering and absorbing as I have done with others. Are those my only options? James asked, carefully navigating the politics of this conversation. Preservation or conquest? Those are the options I offer to any species that draws my attention and interest, Zarantha said bluntly. The galaxy is a competitive environment. Species either grow strong enough to maintain independence, or they become part of larger empires. That is reality of interstellar existence. I am offering you opportunity to advocate for humanity's independence by demonstrating that your species has sufficient value to warrant preservation rather than absorption. Then I suppose I should make compelling case for preservation. James considered how to explain Earth and humanity to an alien empress who thought in terms of conquest and absorption. Humanity is diverse. We're single species biologically, but we express that through thousands of distinct cultures, languages, traditions, philosophical frameworks. We don't have the unified governmental structure you have. We're a collection of nations and factions that cooperate and conflict in complex patterns. We're individually weak compared to many species, but we're collectively resilient in ways that have allowed us to survive circumstances that should have destroyed us multiple times throughout our history. He warmed to the subject, forgetting briefly that he was prisoner advocating for his species' survival. We're creative. We solve problems through innovation rather than overwhelming force. We adapt rapidly to new circumstances. We value individual agency and freedom, even when it complicates governance and creates inefficiencies. We're contradictory and frustrating and beautiful in our chaos. We create art and music and literature that explores what it means to be conscious, to exist, to strive for meaning in a universe that doesn't provide obvious answers. We're flawed and we know it, but we keep trying to be better anyway. You love your species, Zarantha observed, tilting her head in that gesture of assessment James had learned meant she was processing something significant. Despite their flaws, despite the ways they frustrate you, despite their lack of unity and efficiency, you love them. That is admirable quality. I do not love my people in that way. I rule them, I protect them, I expand their territory and ensure their dominance. But love, that is weakness I cannot afford as empress. Is that why you haven't taken consort in 50 years? James asked, then immediately wondered if he'd crossed line by asking such personal question. Because love is weakness you can't afford. But Zarantha didn't seem offended. I have not taken consort because no one has interested me sufficiently to justify the vulnerability that partnership requires. Consort is not mere companion. Consort shares power, has voice in decisions, becomes target for anyone who wishes to harm the empress. My last consort died defending me from assassination attempt. Died because they loved me enough to step between me and attacker's weapon. Their death devastated me in ways I did not anticipate, and I decided that such vulnerability was luxury I could not afford while ruling empire that faces constant threats internal and external. She leaned forward slightly, her multiple eyes holding his with uncomfortable intensity. Until now, you interest me, James Mitchell. You defy me while accepting reality of your situation. You refuse to submit, but you respect the power I hold. You speak honestly even when honesty is dangerous. You maintain dignity when survival would be easier through complete submission. These qualities are rare among any species. These qualities are valuable beyond measure. These qualities make you beautiful in ways that transcend mere physical aesthetics. You killed my crew, James said quietly, needing to voice the fundamental problem he couldn't reconcile. You destroyed my ship. Everyone I served with died on your orders. And now you're asking me to consider being your consort, partner to the person responsible for killing people I commanded. How is that even possible? How could I ever move past that? I am asking you to consider that your crew's deaths were military necessity. They were in my territory. They were potential threat. Eliminating them was proper defensive action by any military standard. That is separate issue from your survival and the fact that I find you fascinating. She made gesture with her secondary left arm that James had learned indicated emphasis. I am asking you to recognize that you cannot change the past, but you can choose your future. I am asking you to see me as individual with interests and desires beyond my role as Empress. I am asking you to acknowledge that we are both more than the circumstances that brought us together. She stood from her throne, movement that caused every Zyrathi in the room to snap to attention, and walked down to where James sat, stopping close enough that he had to look up to meet her eyes. And I am telling you honestly that I find you fascinating in ways I have not experienced in 5 decades, that I wish to explore this fascination, that I am offering you status and protection that no human has ever held in Zyrathi society, that I want you, James Mitchell, not as prisoner or trophy but as genuine partner. That is honest statement of my intent. Will you be equally honest with your response? James looked up at her, at the Empress who could order his death with gesture, who had killed his crew, who was now offering him partnership that was simultaneously opportunity and trap. I need time to think about this. Time to process what you're offering and what it would mean. Can you give me that, or do you require immediate answer? I can give you time, Zarantha said. 3 days to consider. Then you will answer me honestly, yes or no. I will respect either answer, but I will have answer. Is that acceptable? Yes, James agreed. 3 days, then I'll give you honest answer about whether this is even possible. Those 3 days were strangest of James's life. He was given complete freedom to explore the ship within security restrictions, always escorted but not confined. His guards, he'd learned their names as best he could pronounce them with human vocal apparatus, became something like companions. They answered his endless questions about Zyrathi culture, explained the impossibly complex political dynamics of the empire, helped him understand what being Empress's consort would actually mean. One of his guards, who James had started thinking of as Krath, based on closest human approximation of their clicking name, was particularly helpful during a conversation in what passed for observation deck aboard the massive carrier. Why does she really want me? James asked, watching stars stream past through the viewport. Be completely honest. I'm prisoner who refused to submit to her authority. That should earn execution or at minimum permanent imprisonment, not courtship from the Empress herself. You impressed her, Krath explained, their multiple eyes reflecting starlight in patterns that suggested they were choosing words carefully. Empress Zarantha has ruled for 117 standard years. In that time, literally thousands of beings have appeared before her throne, subjects seeking favor, prisoners awaiting judgment, diplomats negotiating treaties, warriors proving loyalty. Every single one of them either submitted immediately and completely, or they rebelled foolishly and were executed for their defiance. Krath turned to face James fully. You did neither. You acknowledged her power and authority while maintaining your own dignity and self-respect. You accepted death as possibility while refusing to facilitate it yourself. You showed her that you understood reality of power dynamics while not allowing that reality to crush your individual worth. That balance impressed her deeply, made her see you as potential equal rather than just another subject or prisoner. And Empress Zarantha has not viewed anyone as potential equal since her last consort died 50 years ago. What was her last consort like? James asked, genuinely curious. Warrior from species we conquered early in Empress's reign. Brilliant military strategist, completely devoted to Empress despite coming from conquered people. They were bonded for 30 years before assassination attempt. Their death devastated Empress in ways that shocked everyone. We had not realized how deeply she could be affected by loss of individual when she commands millions. She executed entire conspiracy behind the assassination, not just the assassins themselves, but their families, their associates, everyone remotely connected to the plot. Then she declared she would take no more consorts because partnership was vulnerability she could not afford as Empress. Krath's mandibles moved in pattern that suggested something like sadness. Until you remind her that equals can exist. That partnership is possible even for someone with absolute power. That she is more than just role she plays. She is individual who can want things beyond power and conquest and control. That is gift of enormous value to someone who has been lonely for 50 years while ruling empire. And if I refuse her, James had to ask, if I tell her that I can't move past the fact that she killed my crew, that I can't become consort to someone responsible for their deaths, then you remain honored guest until she decides alternative arrangement. You would not be executed for refusing. She respects you too much for that now. But you would not be released either. You know too much about her ship, her court, her personal interests and vulnerabilities. You would live here, comfortable but constrained, until some future circumstance changed the situation. Prisoner with excellent amenities, essentially. James considered this for a long time, watching stars and thinking about his choices, or rather, his lack of choices. Finally, he made his decision. He requested formal audience with Zarantha. She granted it immediately, receiving him in her private chambers rather than throne room, space that felt more personal, imposing though it still clearly belonged to someone with absolute authority over millions of lives. You have answer for me, Zarantha said as James entered. It wasn't question. I do. James took deep breath of generated Earth-normal atmosphere. I'll accept your courtship, with conditions. You bargain with your Empress, but she sounded amused rather than offended. You dare to place conditions on acceptance of honor that countless beings would kill to receive. I bargain with the woman who's courting me, James corrected carefully. Because if this is going to work, if we're going to build genuine partnership rather than just formalized arrangement, I need certain things to be possible. And I think you're wise enough to understand that coerced partnership isn't actually partnership at all. Name your conditions, Zarantha said, settling onto furniture that was clearly designed for private relaxation rather than public ceremony. First, I need to communicate with Earth. Not military intelligence or strategic information, just personal message to my family letting them know I'm alive. They deserve to know I didn't die with my crew. They deserve closure. Granted, heavily monitored communication through secure channels, but granted, your family will know you survived. Second, I need honesty between us. Real honesty, not diplomatic filtering or careful political language. If you want partnership, I need to know I can speak freely without fearing execution every time I disagree with you or question your decisions. That is already established, Zarantha pointed out. I have not executed you yet despite numerous opportunities and provocations. Your honesty is part of what makes you valuable to me. Third and most important, if this courtship leads to actual consort relationship, I need to know I'm partner, not possession. That my opinions and perspectives matter. That I have real agency and voice in decisions that affect me, even while acknowledging your ultimate authority as Empress. I won't be decoration or trophy. Either I'm genuine partner or this doesn't work. Zarantha was quiet for a long moment, her multiple eyes studying him with that intense focus. You ask for much, James Mitchell. You ask for things that could be seen as limiting my authority or creating vulnerability in my power structure. I ask for minimum requirements of healthy partnership between equals, James countered. If you can't grant these things, then what you want isn't partnership. You just want interesting possession. And I won't be that, not even to survive. You are not possession, Zarantha said, and there was edge to her voice that suggested genuine emotion behind the words. You are worthy equal who happens to lack military force or political power to back that equality in practical terms. That is precisely why I want you. Because you understand that power and worth are not identical concepts. Because you have intrinsic worth independent of power you wield. And that worth is rare and precious beyond measure in Galaxy, where most beings measure value solely through strength and conquest. She stood, moving closer. I grant your conditions. You may communicate with your family under monitoring to ensure no strategic information is transmitted. You may speak freely in my private chambers, though public dissent would require response for political reasons. And if you become my consort, you will be genuine partner with real voice in decisions that affect you. Though ultimate authority remains mine, because I am Empress and that fundamental reality cannot change without destroying the empire I have built. Then I accept your courtship, James said, feeling like he was stepping off cliff into unknown. I can't promise I'll fall in love with you. That's not something anyone can promise or control. But I promise I'll give this genuine chance. I'll try to see you as individual rather than just Empress who killed my crew. I'll try to build real partnership rather than just surviving captivity with better amenities. That's all I can honestly offer. That is all I ask, Zarantha said. And then, with surprising gentleness, she reached out with one of her chitinous hands and touched his face. You are beautiful, James Mitchell, and you are brave beyond measure. And you are honest in ways that make me remember I am more than just role I play. That is gift of enormous value. I will try to deserve it. Months passed in patterns James couldn't have predicted when he'd first removed his helmet, and watched Zarantha fall silent at the sight of his face. Courtship became partnership, became something deeper that both of them struggled to name but couldn't deny. James learned Zyrathi culture through immersion that no human had ever experienced, not as prisoner or diplomat, but as accepted member of the Empress's inner circle. Learned to read the subtle movements of mandibles that conveyed emotional nuance. Learned which colors in bioluminescent patterns meant which emotions. Learned the complex web of political relationships that governed the empire and kept Zarantha's authority absolute while still allowing for individual agency within strict hierarchical structures. Zarantha learned about humanity through James, through conversations that lasted hours where he explained Earth's chaotic diversity, humanity's contradictory nature, the ways human emotions drove behavior in patterns that seemed illogical to species that valued strategic thinking above feeling. She listened with focus that suggested genuine interest rather than just political calculation. Your species is inefficient, she observed one evening in their shared quarters, living space that had evolved gradually from guest quarters where James stayed to private space they both inhabited. You waste enormous resources on art and entertainment that serves no strategic purpose. You allow individuals to make choices that damage collective good. You organize yourselves through systems that create conflict and waste rather than unified efficiency. And yet you survive, even thrive. I do not understand how this is possible. Because efficiency isn't everything, James explained, comfortable enough now to sprawl on furniture that had been modified for human proportions. Beauty matters. Individual expression matters. Freedom to make our own choices, even bad ones, matters more to humans than optimal outcomes achieved through coercion. We'd rather be chaotically free than efficiently enslaved. That's fundamental to human psychology. It is wasteful and irrational, Zarantha insisted, but her tone suggested she found the irrationality fascinating rather than contemptible. And yet I find myself valuing aspects of human perspective that contradict everything I was taught about proper governance and social organization. You have changed how I think about ruling my empire, James Mitchell. That is a dangerous gift to give an empress. Good dangerous or bad dangerous? James asked with small smile. I have not yet decided, she admitted. Ask me again in another 50 years when I have had time to fully evaluate consequences of allowing human to influence my thinking. Their relationship deepened gradually, through accumulated moments of honesty and vulnerability that neither had expected. Zarantha told him about the loneliness of absolute power, about how every interaction was filtered through political calculation, about how she couldn't remember the last time anyone had touched her without it being formal ritual or necessary protocol. James told her about losing his crew, about the guilt he still carried for being the only survivor, about how he'd accepted death and then been given unexpected life and didn't quite know what to do with it. "Do you still blame me?" Zarantha asked one evening many months into their partnership. "For your crew's deaths, do you still hold me responsible?" "Yes," James said honestly. "I probably always will on some level. They died on your orders. That's fact I can't change or ignore." But he struggled to articulate complicated truth. "I also understand now that you made military decision based on information available to you at the time. My crew was in your territory we didn't know was yours, but that's our failure of intelligence, not your failure of judgment. You protected your borders. That's your responsibility as Empress. My crew's deaths are tragedy, but they're not crime. I can grieve them while understanding that you weren't wrong to give the order you gave." "That is generous perspective from someone who lost people under his command," Zarantha observed. "It's honest perspective from someone who spent months getting to know you as individual rather than just enemy Empress," James corrected. "You're not monster, Zarantha. You're ruler making impossible decisions every day where someone suffers regardless of what you choose. I don't envy you that burden." "Do you love me?" she asked suddenly, vulnerability evident in the way her bioluminescent patterns shifted through uncertain colors. "I know we agreed you couldn't promise that, but has it happened anyway? Do you love me, James Mitchell?" "Yes," James admitted, surprised to realize it was completely true. "I didn't expect to. I actively tried not to for several months because it felt like betrayal of my crew's memory. But I love you anyway. The person you are beneath the role you play. The woman who finds me beautiful. The Empress who granted all my conditions and actually kept her word about treating me as partner rather than possession. The individual who tells me about her loneliness and asks for my opinion even when my perspective contradicts her training and experience. Yes, I love you." Zarantha's patterns shifted to colors that James had learned meant profound emotional impact. "I love you as well," she said quietly. "I did not expect to love again after my last consort died. I thought that capacity was gone, burned out by grief and buried under responsibilities of ruling. You returned it. You reminded me that I am more than just Empress, that I can be individual with personal desires and connections while still fulfilling my role. That is gift beyond price, James Mitchell. That is why I claimed you when I could have executed you. Your beauty drew my attention, yes, but your character, your courage, your honesty, your dignity in face of death, that is what earned my love." They formalized their partnership through Zyrathi ceremonies that James only partially understood, but participated in with genuine commitment. He became officially recognized as Empress's consort, position that gave him enormous status within the empire, while also painting target on him for anyone who saw him as vulnerability or foreign corruption of their Empress. There were assassination attempts, 3 of them in the first year of their formal partnership. James survived all of them thanks to security measures Zarantha implemented, and his own military training that meant he could actually defend himself when threatened. Each attempt strengthened their bond, proved that he was willing to fight to survive, to stay with her despite the danger. "You could have left," Zarantha told him after the 3rd attempt, holding him close in the aftermath of violence that had killed 2 assassins and wounded 3 guards. "After first assassination attempt, I would have arranged safe passage back to human space if you had asked. You never asked. Why?" "Because I love you," James said simply. "Because being with you is worth the danger. Because I'd rather face assassins at your side than be safe and alone somewhere else. That's what partnership means, Zarantha. It means choosing each other even when the choice is difficult." Years passed. Their partnership became accepted reality within the empire. The human consort who influenced the Empress in subtle ways, who brought perspective from species that valued chaos and inefficiency, but also creativity and adaptability. James became unofficial diplomatic bridge between humanity and the Zarathi Empire, facilitating communications that led to formal treaty, replacing the hostile standoff that had characterized human-Zarathi relations previously. Your crew's deaths led to this, Zarantha observed during the treaty signing ceremony, where human diplomats and Zarathi officials formalized peace agreements and trade relationships. Their accidental incursion into my territory, your survival, our partnership, all of it culminated in alliance between our peoples. Does that give their deaths meaning, or does it feel like justification you don't want? Both, James admitted. I'm glad something positive came from tragedy, but I'd still trade this alliance to have them back if that choice were available. They were good people who deserved better than to die in navigation error. The fact that their deaths ultimately led to something beneficial doesn't make them less dead, or make me miss them less. You honor them, Zarantha said, by refusing to pretend their deaths were acceptable price for alliance, by holding grief and hope simultaneously. That is wisdom I am still learning from you. When people ask them, and eventually people did ask, as their partnership became famous across multiple species, how the Empress of the Zarathi Empire and a human prisoner had built relationship that changed interstellar politics, they told the true story. She ordered me to remove my helmet, James would say. I refused because removing it would kill me. She provided breathing apparatus instead of forcing compliance, showing she valued seeing my face more than demonstrating absolute authority. I removed my helmet. She fell silent because apparently I was beautiful by Zarathi aesthetic standards. Everything followed from that moment. He defied me while accepting reality of his powerlessness, Zarantha would add. He maintained dignity while acknowledging my authority. He showed me that worth and power are not identical, that individual can have enormous value despite lacking military or political strength. That lesson changed how I understood leadership and partnership. His beauty drew my attention, but his character earned my love. And does the Empress still find you beautiful? People would ask James with varying degrees of amusement depending on their species. Every single day, James confirmed. She tells me regularly, usually when I least expect it. You are beautiful, my consort. It's how she reminds me that she sees me as individual rather than just human advisor to throne or political asset. She sees me, really sees me, values me for who I am rather than what I represent. That's the foundation of everything we built together. And the human still defies you occasionally. People would ask Zarantha. Frequently, she would say with patterns that suggested affection. In private, he questions my decisions, challenges my assumptions, forces me to justify my reasoning rather than simply commanding and expecting obedience. That is valuable beyond measure, having partner who treats me as individual who can be wrong rather than infallible authority. It makes me better Empress, makes me better individual. That is gift I did not know I needed until he gave it. In private moments, years into partnership that had survived assassination attempts and political crises, and the fundamental challenge of building relationship across species and power differentials, they would reflect on the improbable path that had brought them together. I was so certain I was going to die, James said one evening, holding Zarantha close in the way they'd learned worked for their very different anatomies. When they brought me to your throne room, I had completely accepted death, made peace with it, and then you ordered me to remove my helmet and everything changed. I was so certain you would bore me like all the others, Zarantha admitted. Another prisoner who would either submit immediately or rebel foolishly. You did neither. You showed me something new, something I hadn't seen in 50 years of ruling. You showed me that being seen, truly seen as individual rather than role, was possibility I had forgotten could exist. Best military disaster I ever survived, James said lightly. Best invasion of my territory I ever responded to, Zarantha agreed. Your crew's deaths were tragedy. Your survival was gift. Our partnership is miracle neither of us expected. I regret the tragedy, treasure the gift, and thank whatever forces govern existence for the miracle. I love you, James said simply. And I love you, Zarantha responded. My beautiful human who refused to kneel but stood with dignity. My partner who challenges me while respecting me. My consort who reminds me daily that I am more than empress. I am individual capable of love and vulnerability and growth. You are beautiful, James Mitchell, inside and out, never doubt that. And surrounded by the impossible partnership they'd built from tragedy and defiance and unexpected recognition, they proved that sometimes the most important moments came from the simplest acts. Removing a helmet, showing a face, being seen and valued for who you truly were beneath all the roles and expectations. That moment of recognition, when Zarantha had fallen silent, stunned by the human before her, had changed everything. Had built alliance between species, partnership between individuals, and love that transcended every logical